Hey guys, Tom here from the Investing with Tom YouTube channel. Welcome back to the channel. If you enjoyed today's video, hit like, hit subscribe, and that way you can see future videos as well. So today we're going to be talking about cash. How much should you have in your portfolio and how should you think about what those proportions kind of look like over time. And this, to be honest, is one of the main things in investing that I've really struggled to get some solid sort of guidelines around. So I was recently watching a presentation the other day by one of my favorite investors, Mohnish Pabrai, the author of The Dundo Investor, a book I'm currently rereading at the moment. And in that presentation, which I'll link in the description below, he talked about cash and how he thinks about cash, how much he thinks about, he should be investing in the stock market versus holding in cash should there be short-term fluctuations in the market, and the framework that he kind of puts around that. So it's really the first time I've ever heard anyone kind of dive into using actual numbers and kind of quantifying how they think about some of this stuff, which personally is something I really need in investing, is to have some solid numbers around some of these guidelines. So it's something I spoke about a little bit in my live stream the other day, but I wanted to dive into a little bit more detail around some of Pabrai's thinking here and some of the reasons I really like it. So with any video like this, not financial advice, do your own research, so on, entertainment purposes only. But for now, let's get into it. Let's talk about how Pabrai thinks about his cash position. And to be honest, this is probably a philosophy that I'm going to be taking on board with my own stock market portfolio as well. So hope you enjoy it. Let's get into the video. Before we get into some of the pros and cons of this particular strategy, let me give you the strategy itself. Mohnish basically has several different thresholds upon which he will continue to take more of his available cash and deploy that into opportunities in the stock market. So if he can't meet, let's say, the second criteria on this sort of list, then he won't invest the further amount of cash that comes along with that sort of second threshold. So let me walk you through this list. Essentially, Pabrai will invest up to 75% of his available cash if he has opportunities where he sees at least a double over the next 3 to 5 years. That's not a time frame that he specifically mentions in this video, but I know from watching several Mohnish Pabrai videos and reading his book and so on, that's really the time frame we're going to be talking about here, is a double within 3 to 5 years. So if he finds a number of opportunities that fit into that category, he will invest up to 75% of his available capital and leave 25% of his available capital in cash, in short-term bonds, those sorts of things, generating at the moment with such low interest rates not much money at all, but it's sitting there should market prices fluctuate and he gets a further opportunity to invest more. So 75%, up to 75% of the portfolio into at least doubles is kind of the first threshold. The next threshold is applicable to the next 10% of the portfolio. So if he finds stocks that he thinks will at least triple in the next 3 to 5 years, that's when he's investing the next 10% of his portfolio. He's getting up to 85% invested, and that's the next threshold. So the threshold after that is, again, 10%. This time he's looking for stocks that can 4x in the next 3 to 5 years, turn $1 into $4 over that period of time. And if he can find opportunities that fit that category, he is going to invest an additional 10%. So if you're doing the maths at home, this takes him up to about 95% invested. So almost all the way out of cash, almost has every single cent working for him at this point. Just leaves him with 5% sitting in available cash again, should we have big market fluctuations and some really attractive opportunities come up. So that last 5% is what Mohnish Pabrai calls very expensive capital. And that essentially means that this will pretty much always stay in cash because he always wants to have at least some cash available to, again, jump on opportunities as they come up, unless he sees an opportunity where he can get at least a 5x in 3 to 5 years. So turning $1 into $5 over the next 3 to 5 years, again with relatively low risk, because he's not trying to do this by buying high-flying growth stocks and extreme speculation or anything. He's trying to find really deeply undervalued situations. But long story short, he'll be looking to invest that final 5% of the portfolio should he find something that he thinks can 5x over 3 to 5 years. So those are the thresholds, up to 75% if we've got doubles, another 10% if we've got triples, another 10% if we've got 4x's, and that final 5% if we have 5x's available for investment. So that's the framework. I really like it. So I want to just get into some detail around the pros, the cons, and the way I kind of think about this, these guidelines from Mohnish Pabrai. So let's get into that. So first, I just want to talk about one of the cons to this strategy. The list of cons isn't particularly long, but one of them on there is quite a powerful negative with having a lot of money in cash. So basically, it's called cash drag. Essentially, what cash drag is you having a portion of the portfolio not invested, and essentially whatever your return is in the stock market that year, having a percentage of your portfolio sitting in cash will sort of drag that return back towards zero. So what I mean by that, let's say you have 25% of the portfolio sitting in cash. So in Mohnish's situation, the best you can find is doubles over the next 3 to 5 years. Then you're going to have that 25% really pull down your returns. So to make the math simple for this example, let's say that 25% that's sitting in cash effectively makes zero return because interest rates are so low. We can get some return out there, but let's just assume for this example that it's zero. If you have 75% of the portfolio invested and that portion of the portfolio makes a 10% positive return in the stock market, but you happen to have had that 25% in cash, then your overall return for that portfolio is 7.5%. So over a long period of time, I'll put some compound interest calculator sort of screenshots up here. You'll see that over a 20-year period of time, this can actually take a $10,000 investment from turning into $67,000 if it were fully invested, right down to $42,000. So that's really the main disadvantage of cash drag. And yeah, that's really the main con to this one. The pros for me probably outweigh the cons. This really assumes that you always have 25% of the portfolio in cash and you never buy things when they're cheap and so on. I think as a value investor and as someone like Pabrai is able to do, you're able to identify when things are really expensive, when things are really cheap. And when things are really cheap, you can put that money to work at really good rates. So, for example, if your average return is of that money that's invested is say 10%, and you have 25% sitting in cash, just as in our previous example, at times where you put that 25% to work, that 25% might be getting invested at a time when prices are really low. And that portion of the portfolio might be doing 25 or 30% a year and really juicing up those returns. So if you balance out the 25 and 30% a year returns on that portion of money, and then you also mix it in with a few years of near enough zero returns, it can still balance out to be a really, really good rate. And that's the main reason why people like to have a portion of the portfolio in cash, is they can jump on these cheap opportunities and really ramp up their rate of return in future years after that. So that's the main con, is cash drag. If you're not someone who thinks you can confidently identify those deep discounts to intrinsic value, that is going to be a negative for you. It's something mutual funds and ETF investors and so on talk about a lot, not so much individual stock pickers. You see people like Warren Buffett currently sitting with $128 billion in cash within Berkshire Hathaway. So there's definitely a lot of people very comfortable with sitting in cash and that have a history of keeping a large proportion of cash in their portfolio at certain times. And over the, by and large, it's worked out very, very well for those people, and that's the reason they're famous. So that's the main con. I really want to get into the pros and talk through some of the pros with this particular strategy, some of the reasons I really, really like it. So let's get into that. Okay, so let's get into some of the reasons I really like the strategy. Let's get into some of the pros. The first reason I really like the strategy is because it assumes that the investor can do a couple of different things. And if you're someone that wants to take the strategy on board, it's going to have to force you to be able to do those things. So the first thing is being able to actually figure out what type of return you should expect to make from an investment. I know that sounds really, really basic to a lot of people. But unfortunately, a lot of people that are investing in the stock market really are speculating. They're looking at companies that they like. They're not paying a particularly large amount of attention to the valuations that they're actually buying into those companies at. They just want to say, I want to put $1,000 into Apple, or I want to put $1,000 into whatever stock it is. And they're really not looking at, okay, I'm putting $1,000 in. What am I actually likely to get back, and what's some of the simple maths behind that stuff kind of look like? So the first thing that this particular strategy around cash management really enforces is being able to actually have a good idea of the returns you're going to make, pay attention to valuations on the company, and that's why, one of the main reasons I'm a big fan of it. So I've got a valuation video on the channel. It's the most popular video on this channel, and I am well overdue to do an update on it because my strategy or my philosophy has changed slightly on approaching valuation. So keep an eye out for that video. We'll get into that at some point. But basically, you need to know what the intrinsic value of a company is when you buy it. You want to be buying it at a discount. And when Mohnish Pabrai talks about looking for doubles or triples or 4Xs, again, he's not talking about companies growing at insane rates. He's not investing in, not to go after anyone investing in this company, but he's not looking for the Teslas of the world and things that are experiencing really rapid growth. If you read a lot of his writings, he's talking about investing in businesses with very slow rates of change, simple businesses that are easy to understand, and ones that you can get a really good idea of the cash returns from. So when he's looking for a 2 or 3 or 4x, he's not looking for things that will be worth $1 today and will grow to have an intrinsic value much higher in the future. That may be a component of what he's looking at. But really what he's looking at is he wants to identify something worth $1 and he wants to buy it for 50 cents or less. So if he can buy it for 50 cents and it goes up to that dollar, that discount to intrinsic value kind of closes over time, he's got his double. If he buys it at 30 cents on the dollar, and again that gap closes over 3 to 5 years, he's got his triple, and so on and so on. So he's looking more at those really big, deeply discounted pies, as he would call them. Not necessarily looking at massive growth. So he's not getting more and more kind of speculative as he goes down this track and looks for 3 and 4 and 5Xs. He's in fact getting less and less speculative. He's finding deals that are so unbelievably compelling that you would be stupid not to put a large proportion of money into those deals. He's identifying things where companies that he thinks are worth $1 billion, and he can buy them at valuations of $100 million. Insanely deep discounts like that, where for whatever reason people in the stock market just don't want to own those things at that time. So that's one of the reasons I really like the strategy. Forces you to quantify things, forces you to be an investor rather than a speculator, and that's never a bad thing for your investment returns. So that's one of the main reasons I like this strategy. The other reason I really like it, and we've talked about this a lot throughout the video, is it always leaves you open for opportunities. So if we do have fluctuations in prices over time, you should pretty much always have a portion of cash ready to go. The only time really that you are going to be fully invested using a strategy like this is being in the depths of a recession in like a 2008, 2009 kind of period of time, where there are just so many ridiculously cheap stocks around that you would get invested very quickly. So that's something that Pabrai has done. He got heavily invested during that time, and although his portfolio got rather beat up during 2007 and 2008 with the big drop, he had many multi-baggers kind of on the way out, and recovered really well and made further gains over and above that as a result. So that's one of the things I like. You've pretty much always got something sitting in cash. At this stage at the moment, personally at least, I'm not finding too many really compelling opportunities. So if I was following this Mohnish strategy, which is something I am going to adopt, I would be starting to have a much higher proportion of my portfolio in cash. And it leaves me in a really good position should market prices go down at some point. So that's one of the things I really like. That is Mohnish Pabrai's framework for thinking about a cash position in a portfolio, and I really like it. Like I say, it's the first time I've really heard someone get into actual numbers and quantify some of that cash. We often hear about people, having half the portfolio in cash or being 100% in cash and completely out of the market because they think this thing's so high. And I really like the fact that, we're able to actually put some numbers and some guidelines on this. And it will vary, the positions of cash we have will vary depending on the opportunities each individual is looking at and what they're able to find. So I really liked it. I hope you did too, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit like, hit subscribe. You can watch some old videos over there. Hit subscribe if you haven't already over there. Otherwise, I will see you in the next one. And thank you everyone for 3,000 subscribers. I see we just ticked over that in the last couple of days. So welcome along to all the new people. If you've made it this far through the video, I thank you very much. But have a great day, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.